DaJohn Yarborough is a must-get prospect for Washington in 2027.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers out there on this Thursday. Recruiting heavy. We're going to have a little bit of fun at the end. Talk about any potential surprise visitors that Washington might make a late push for. We'll get into that. And just how many more players this 2027 class can hold, because you've already got 13 commits and numbers are gonna get a little dicey at a certain point. But before we get there, it's almost official visit season. We've been waiting. Washington has 3 big time weekends of official visits lined up this year for May 29th, June 5th, and June 19th. And there are a lot of guys that we've talked about where it's, okay, yeah, Tevita Nonu, this guy, that guy, like that Washington needs to get in the 2027 class. But one person who I think we both wanted to make sure we put a major emphasis on was 4-star offensive lineman DaJohn Yarborough.
Yeah, a guy from the infamous Basha High School. Just not just Damon Williams, but you can just run down the list of guys that come out of Basha. And he put out a tweet, I don't know if it was Monday or whatever day it was, where he was with Michael Switzer, made an in-home visit with him. And I almost thought,
it's the thumbnail of this video, by the way, for all our YouTubers.
Exactly. And to me, it was almost like the same way with Reese Russell, where it's like, you're committed, but you're still keeping it open. But like, something about this recruitment tells me that Washington, and that's why he's so important, is you just look at the tape and interior guys that you won't say plug and play, because it's always hard for freshmen to do that. But it seems like Michael Switzer has been that guy at Washington, and you need to continue stacking, 4 stars after 4 stars in these classes, and getting a guy like, DaJohn Yarborough would be massive, especially given who you already have in this class.
Well, it's also massive because he's 6'5" and 330 pounds. And that's one of those things that helps a lot, where you talk about the plug and play aspect. That's one of the biggest things, where obviously his junior season got cut short due to a fractured ankle. So we didn't necessarily get to see everything on tape with him, where it was a little bit of a slower burn to get that 4th star. And it was one of those things where moving down from Minnesota to Basha was such a big thing for him, where it's, he's going to be able to block for Noah Roberts. He's going to be working with, having to practice against a 5-star defensive tackle in Landon Wade in the 2028 class, and some of those other high-end prospects that you have, not just down there at Basha, but just in Arizona at this point in time. So he was one of those guys that, as soon as that happened and Washington made that offer, it was, okay, I see where this is going, and this is certainly a name to keep an eye on. And so I look at how this offensive line class is just continuing to play out, where you got Reese Russell. And there's so many other guys that we've talked about, whether it be Rashawn Lavataille, Ty Kennedy, as some, tackle targets. We'll get into some of these other names a little bit later on too. But DaJohn is just that one guy right now where, if you do want to have that physically ready to play guy in every class, that he would be the one for you in 2027.
That Dom Harris, if you will, that just big earthy, you see him coming, and it's like, no matter if he actually ends up playing as a freshman or needs that Sham Talalia plan of just getting the college wave program, as you mentioned, having that shortened season, maybe catch that up. And again, at Washington, you don't need to play right away. Like, there is the benefit of at least getting special teams reps and things like that, but it's more or less just getting those guys into practice so that they have a year in their college program and say, hey, You're going to be competing next year with, I don't know, insert Reese or whoever you want to say is already on the roster for like a left guard or right
Let's
guard.
go with Jack Schaefer.
Perfect example. And that's why you continue to have like a 3-star late flip he had a year and a half, 2 years ago now with Jack, that now you're getting in the rotation, and we hope by next year you're really playing significant minutes. But in order to have that depth, that's how you build that up year by year.
No, absolutely. And there's another guy I wanted to talk about as it just pertains to all this, because it's the most obvious name, right? And we're going to keep harping on it because it's what Washington needs in this class. And that's 4-star defensive tackle Tevita Nonu, where we've seen the crystal ball rolling for Washington on over on 3. And this is just one of those guys where everything just fits so well, where I feel like it's the same thing with DaJohn on offense as it is with Tevita on defense, where you've got a couple of those commits already in Matamatagi Uyunglele, in John Ioane. But if you add a guy like Tevita to that, not only are you keeping one of the best defensive tackles on the West Coast close to home, but you're doing that with one of the top players in the state of Washington. And it's one of those things where, it almost feels tired at a certain point because we've spent so much time talking about him. But at the same point, he really is just that important to this class.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you were making all those good points, it made me think of, you never get tired of ZRS. And that's kind of what, when he, stayed home in that class, it was, hey, this was the big push. This was the guy we had to get, along with, Epperson. You go down the list of guys, but Tevita Nonu is that guy, and it's O'Dea High School. I don't know if it was you or whoever asked the question to Taylor Mays when he got hired. It was, how do you think this is going to be when you go back to O'Dea High School? Like, is that kind of one of the connections? And he's like, well, obviously we hope there's some, fruit that comes from that labor. And even though Taylor Mays is a DB coach, just having that Miles Gaskin that, I know Owen Prentice didn't work out, but you just go down the list of guys that have come from O'Dea, and
David Schwarzel being a new one.
Exactly. And now, again, I didn't mention him because we haven't seen him play, so there's not the Miles Gaskin effect.
But it was still a good win at the end of the day. That's why I wanted to make sure we threw his name out there.
And that's exactly important, because much like this defensive line, offensive line depth that we're talking about, it's not just getting Derek Coleman Brewster 1 year and then you throw in a bunch of guys from pick wherever and you hope to coach them, which, by the way, still a great plan, still worked out for Chris Peterson and other coaches. But really, when you get into that CFP discussion, that top 12 discussion, you need to have 4-star guy after 4-star guy after 4-star guy, whether they play as freshmen, sophomores, or whatever. Like, you just need to continue developing that depth. And when you talk about O'Dea High School in Washington, they're pretty synonymous.
No, absolutely. And that's such a big thing as it pertains to Tevita specifically, because in so many other years, it has been so rare to go out there and find those big time defensive tackles, not just, in the state of Washington, but on the West Coast in general. And that was something where it was always really great to go out and win for these big time battles, like a Jacob Bandis in the 2019 class, or Fatu Tuitele in the same year, getting that kid out of Hawaii, especially with what his top 5 was at that time. And I don't think Tevita is on that caliber as a recruit, because Fatui was like a top 30 player in the country when he committed to UW. So it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, but I think about just what kind of impact he has, and what, you look at just what the reaction is with a lot of these local guys that stay home, especially with how it was with David Schwarzel and getting that late flip on signing day to get him to Washington. Like, those things really do matter.
Caleb McGarry comes to mind in that way. I know it wasn't a late flip, but Wisconsin and Washington were pretty close. But the one thing that even differentiates all of these guys from Tevita, you go down the offer list, and it's kind of bizarre, because like the piece, like when you turn on the tape, when you see him now, you might say, well, maybe the 3A, 4A competition isn't great in, say, Washington or King Car or whatever. It's like, yeah, but you still can see the talent on tape, and you still see, like, Notre Dame came along, and there's a few national schools, but you look at it and think, like, there's no Ohio State coming in and fighting for that commitment. There's no, like, this is a commitment where, if anything, it's like, you got in early, you made all these inroads. Like, this is a guy you have to secure above all else, because there's really, like, how does Washington not end up at the Tevita Nonu? I think that's right. The question that I find a harder time answering than, oh, hey, here's like all the reasons why you should pick Washington.
One more guy before we move on here. It's 4-star safety Isala Aisa Wily-Ava. You talk about Taylor Mays and just the impact that Washington has seen from him already on the recruiting trail. I think this is a big one where he's down to 3 schools now: Arizona State, Michigan, Washington. He's going to announce on June 27th. And I feel like this is just another one of those guys where at 6'2", 195, with how he fits in the defense and how long Washington, and specifically Taylor Mays, has been recruiting him, this is just one of those where you really want to see this pay off for Washington at the end of the day, as this safety board just kind of shuffles.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one, because you look at those 3, Arizona State, like, you look at the proximity, there's all different kind of things, but I think that's why you hired Taylor Mays, a guy that's played in the NFL, did it as an All-American at USC, and is from Washington. Now we can actually sell his home state. Never got to do that in college, never got to rep it in the NFL, because it's like, hey, it is. But that's why you were able to go down and go into Bosco, go into Southern California, because Sean McGrew. You could just run down the list of guys from that Bosco, LA region.
I'm stunned that that's the one you went with first over Trent McDuffie.
I mean, again, I'm going back in terms of lanes, because I think Trent, in a little different white, like Jimmy was rolling at DB at that point. Like that one. So this one where it's like Taylor Mays is getting going with, Ryland Dillon Allen. You look at the guy, Alex McGowan, but there's still, like, this would be his not first signature one, but like after Gavin Day, like this would be this year's, okay, hey, this is my guy kind of staple signature.
And there's a lot that can still happen in this 2027 class, but spots are going to fill up really quickly this summer. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Rocket Money. If you ever opened your bank account and thought, where did all my money go? You're not alone. Keep a track of subscriptions, spending, and bills can get overwhelming fast. That's where Rocket Money comes in, helping you take control of your finances all in one place. It tracks all your subscriptions in one spot and can help cancel the ones you don't need with just a few taps. It automatically categorizes your spending so you can actually see where your money's going. And you can set budgets, get alerts, and stay on top of upcoming bills. It just makes everything feel more organized and gives you a clearer picture of your finances day to day. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So we were kind of running through the numbers before we pressed record of like, oh yeah, this could work out this way, that could work out that way. With 13 players already committed in this class, it gets really interesting because I think this conversation needs to start where we started the show, and that's on the offensive line, where I look at what this class could be. Like, if your two tackles are Rashawn Lavatai, who's just rising up the ranks real quick, and Ty Kennedy, you're comfortable with that as your two tackles. You've got Reese Russell on the interior. And then if it's, let's just say, Jacoba Doyle, DaJohn Yarborough, and you also want to add in Tristan Dare, who just set up his official visit as well. Is that a large offensive line class? Yeah, but you're also certainly replenishing a lot of depth there where you're losing at least 3 guys to graduation at the end of the year, depending on, the 5-for-5 stuff that could certainly change some things as well. But I look at this class and I think, all right, let's just say you add in 5 more offensive linemen. That's 18 already. And this class is already looking pretty full.
Yeah, and it's the interesting though. I think you don't really settle on a number, especially at this point of the year, just because you always want to be building those relationships. Like, as you're getting better as a program, these players of high caliber are going to be interested in your program. So if you're Jed Fish, what did he say from the beginning that we've always talked about? You don't turn down talent. So like if talent's going to be interested in you, the question is, do you play some of these guys a little long, which is, hey, we like these 3 guys that we've got committed now, but, we're still willing to consider a number 4 and number 5, like on the offensive line. We see receiver year in and year out. Jed surprised us with at least one receiver that nobody really was talking about, especially not at this point of the year. So I just look at it and, injuries are what they are. We don't know the situation of Jordan Washington. I think, at running back, if a guy's, top 5 in the country and says, hey, I want to take an official visit in, October or whatever, even after you get through June and everything, it's you don't turn down that talent. So I think the number I would set, maybe 17 and a half, 18 and a half, I like that. But if it ends up being like 21, 22 for the right guys, you don't say no.
No, that's what I'm saying is that's just with the offensive line, because you're going to go out and take a couple more defensive linemen, right? Like look at Josh Christensen down in Oregon as one of those guys where he's starting to generate a lot of big time interest. From everything I've heard and my read on that, it's going to come down to UW and Oregon in that particular case. And that's without, even talking about Tevita Nonu, without one or two of these other guys, whether it be a Jagiwane, who just is someone that Washington continues to show a lot of interest in, Troy Milo, who's got an official visit set up, Ty Tautolo, the local kid from Lake Stevens, Achilles Reyna being another one. We'll see how that guy rises. And that was why we wanted to have this discussion, is right there, right? Like if you take 2 of those guys plus knock off 1 offensive lineman, that's still 20. You've got 1 commit in the secondary. You're still looking to add 1, potentially even 2 wide receivers at this point in time. So it's just, okay, yeah, this class is in a very interesting spot at this point in time.
It is. And I think that's why, you're trying, that's what's interesting about recruiting, right? We kind of never really talk. We do talk about it in the sense of the details, but when you think about the grander picture of this is all a projection, you're trying to assess, like, you don't know how many receivers are going to end up playing. Like we could, play 3 freshman receivers this year. That could end up being a reality for whatever reason in time that comes. Does that mean you add more guys? Does a guy transfer out? And you don't want to speculate at this point in time. So that's why it's trying to figure out, what does that number actually look like? Well, we don't know who transfers out at the end of the year. So maybe that number does become this, and you're building these relationships. You're getting these guys on official visits, but like I think of a guy like Trey Moore. That's
sure.
A guy that you're going to talk about, whether he calls in June 30th or December 1st. Like you're going to pick up that phone and say, yes, please, come sign with us. But then there's some of those other guys where like a Trey Moore, like, let's get you in for a visit. We like what you're doing, but we don't necessarily know how that room is going to project short, long term. So Like, let's keep those options open, but still get you in for a visit now, and then we'll just see where it goes.
So I want to circle back to Josh Christensen because I think the example you bring up fits perfectly with him because he was on campus for junior day, didn't have an offer yet. He came back in early April for a spring practice. And I think that was when he did get the offer. And now all of a sudden he's got his official visit set up. Oregon is pushing. They're in the mix too. I think that's a great example of all of this because that's one of those things where, hey, of course, we're pushing here, we're pushing there kind of deal. You get John Ioane in the boat. You get Matamatagiu Iungolele, and then we see Montana Toilolo goes to UCLA. That's certainly something that played a factor in all this. Some of these other guys from California that have already made their decisions in one way or another. I look at a guy like Christensen. It's, okay, yeah, that's one of those big bodied dudes at 6'6", 250 pounds, who certainly has the motor and the athleticism needed to play on the edge. But with his frame, he probably looks like he's going to slide inside of the interior. So it's okay. Yeah, we got to see how these numbers work out. We got to see how a couple of things work out here or there. But in terms of the depth that you need at that position, specifically in the Big Ten, of course, you're always going to be keeping an eye on him and saying, all right, how's this going to work out? What's going to happen here? And then I bring it back to Oregon again, because if they start making that push, especially being the in-state program for him, you have to keep pace with them.
Yeah, and I think it's a case of but then, like Jed would always say, we don't recruit for Oregon or against Oregon. We recruit to Washington. Like you are, I know again, how much that is coach speak, how much that is tongue in cheek, like there's a little bit of both there, right? So, but it's still true in the sense of, well, just because Oregon's pushing for this kid that we do like from the inside, but what happens if, let's just say we say, you know what, let's kind of hold our hand. We're not going to, bet. We're just going to sit right now. And you go to October and, a name we're not even talking about. I'm just throwing these hypotheticals out because if you win, and you also are thinking about like the depth that you already have on that roster with guys like Victor Sanchez Hernandez. You go down some of that list of the 24, 25 guys that are now still, emerging. What if they still haven't gotten the rotation? Then you're still weighing these guys like, and again, it's not to say that all these guys that I'm mentioning or don't have talent, but you just don't, you're so many more unknowns that, well, why are we going to take him? And then now you're going to decommit, or now we got to figure these numbers out. So it's best just to kind of keep that lukewarm. We like you. And I think that's one thing that we should probably note in this. Like, Washington does get credit a lot for just being honest on the recruiting chart.
Yeah.
Like, look, this is our situation. Like, here's where we stand. We like you. Great film. But, we don't end up making it work. It's not because it's just not the right fit for whatever reason. Each person is different. But, like, that's the way you keep the lines of communication open.
Absolutely. And it's something where, you mentioned Trey Moore at wide receiver. It's a conversation that needs to be had about Osani Gayles as well, where he releases his top 5 last week. It's Alabama, Notre Dame, Stanford, Tennessee, and UW. And then there's a report from Rivals Adam Gorney saying that the most optimism is coming from Washington and Notre Dame at this point in time. And that's one of those things where we've talked about it, right? Where he's got some family that live in the area. His sister is a UW alum, and he's certainly been very intrigued by what Washington has to offer. And he's one of those dudes where, like Trey Moore, if he picks up the phone and says, I'm coming, you say, okay, we'll figure that out. Doesn't matter what you have in the room right now, especially for a kid like that who would come in and look to contribute right away in the slot, where it's, all right, we got a freshman All-American there right now in Desmond Roebuck. And then Mason James is the guy pushing for time. Trez Davis is somebody who can play inside and out a little bit. I think about how the wide receiver room is going to work out at this point in time. And most likely we're only going to see one more addition in that room. Trey Moore is the name I would certainly say is the top target at this point and has been for a long time. But Osani is just another one of those guys where, you talk about it like, oh yeah, you keep that line of communication open. You see what happens. That's exactly what's been going on with him, where it's you stay in the race. Oh, cool. He's able to come up for junior day. Yeah, let's make that happen. Oh, you want to come back for an official visit? We're absolutely going to make that happen. Look at how well you fit in the offense. Look, all of a sudden, hey, this is a real thing, that there's a whole lot of possibilities that can come of this with a player of that caliber, because you talk about the not turning down talent thing. This is one of those players that it doesn't matter what the room looks like either way. That's somebody who elevates your room, can play right away. And also you're sending a message, taking a top 40 kid in the nation out of Florida.
And for all those reasons, it's also, what's not to say Jed's offense doesn't evolve this year, and maybe we have some 3 and 4 receivers that actually elevate from what Jed previously had, which was mostly 2 receivers. And you're looking at this room saying, hey, this room can actually handle another body or two, because this offense is going to evolve a little bit. I'm not saying one thing or another. I'm just, there's other things to keep in mind. And when they're recruiting this way, it's almost like, well, you have so many young guys. How do you, manage that attrition long term versus, now you're going to have like 6 freshmen graduate in one class theoretically. It's like, well, wait a minute. Those numbers are going to stagger out. And this is kind of how if you're only taking 1 or 2 and maybe you take 2, these are your 2 horses. Like that's more than okay for whatever the room ends up being down the road.
No, I see where you're going with that. I just want to make sure we mention the secondary before we move on here too, because that's another position that I'm really interested in, where you've got one commit in Maurice Williams, and then you look at some of the outside corners that are coming on visits, whether it be a Camille Loud, Jalen Hill being another name, and then at safety, it's Isala, Gavin Williams, but he'll have announced his commitment by then, most likely to USC from the way the crystal balls are shaping up. Then you also have Malachi Tufu. Giovanni Henley is someone I believe would wind up in the nickel, and Jaden Walk-Green is a name I'm very intrigued by, especially if Gavin Williams does wind up at USC. But again, just to bring it back to this theme of numbers and what this class could look like at the end of the day, I think that these are just all things to keep in mind, because there are so many players that Washington has done such a good job with at this point in time, but only so many spots available.
Yeah, and I mean, if some guys come in elsewhere, we've seen, you still recircle those conversations. It's like, just live in the moment, get the guys on campus, sell what you got. You're not going to be disingenuous, like I said, and then just let the chips fall where they may. Because the important thing in all of this, the numbers, like 4-star, like you're seeing the overall talent coming to Washington, no matter who it ends up being better and better each year.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things where we've seen Washington do a very good job of this over the last few years and get some surprise visitors on campus. Will that happen this year? I thought this would be a really fun thing for us to talk about, because Washington's done a good job with this, right? The night before official visits open up last year, Brandon Arrington, the number 1 athlete in the nation. Hey, I'm coming to Washington for an OV. A couple weeks later, that was one that, we had heard a little more about behind the scenes, but Tristan Givens shows up on campus for an official visit, 5-star edge rusher out of Georgia. And Celeste Moa was another one where that kind of happened a little bit late. You can go back to 2025. There were a couple of names in there too, like the pursuit of Andrew Marsh, but that started a little bit earlier as well. I don't know if that's going to be a thing at 2027 at this point in time, just based on how many dudes are already in this class. But if I had to pick one position where we would see some kind of surprise, I would go with cornerback at this point in time.
I can see that. Like, you're just saying in terms of, given who's in the roster and like that overall, you're looking for kind of.
Let me phrase it this. I hear what you're saying. Let me phrase it this way. I didn't want to come out and say it like this, because I don't want any everydayers out there saying, "Oh, you guys said this would happen." Like, for example, I highly doubt it, but let's say like Hayden Stepp from Bishop Gorman is like, oh, because he's got 4 official visits lined up already, right? Bama, Oregon, Cal, Georgia. So the likelihood of some of these things happening is very low. I bring him up as an example as one of the top uncommitted corners. But like, oh, whoa, Hayden Stepp's coming on a visit to Washington on June 5th? No way. Who would have seen this coming? If there's something like that, I think that's the position we would see it at, just in terms of where Washington is sitting right now. Because obviously, like, Sincere Gaylord is a name that needs to be mentioned at corner, with how Washington has done with him for a very, very long time now. But I just think that's one of those positions where, despite what the room looks like right now, you've got Emmanuel Carnley, Dylan Robinson, Jaron Jones being another one of those blue chip guys. Elias Johnson obviously had a tremendous spring practice, and what Rajon Duncan could be able to add to that room this fall. I still look at that position and say, all right, if there's a guy that Washington believes can come in and contribute right away, we know they're not going to say no to that. I just think in terms of where we've seen the interest, that's the one that at this point in time has been the quietest.
So I like everything that you said. So I agree with you that it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Like, I think last year, you could probably guess receiver was going to be that one, but I think this probably won't surprise you, but it's edge. Like, I think that's another position that you kind of just look at any time. And again, there's no real names. Like, I mean, if I just ran through the top 25 right now, like, maybe a guy like, Zion Forster committed to Texas A&M. I'm just saying a guy at IMG, so you have relationships established. You don't know what happens. Maybe, there's literally no connection. I'm just throwing that as an example of a top, 15, 20 guy that maybe Texas A&M goes 4-8 this year. Maybe UW goes, the more
sure.
This, and the reason where I get this kind of type of approach is I agree with you at cornerback. I just don't think it's going to be this time of year. Like, that's the problem. I think it's going to be like, that would be like a October to December type of push where whether you're adding another corner because somebody else had to play up or the numbers shake out however they want to, like those type of positions, they're premium talent positions like tackle, receiver, you already have those boxes checked. But also when you're talking about the Washington brand, if you're able to win, if you're able to be 10-2, like we think they might be able to, or even better this season, that talent is you're going to start having these people say, hey, wait a minute, that position, you guys are pretty, edge looks fine right now, but you could always add another body or two there. And so that would be that would be the position. I agree with cornerback, but just mine would be edge from that same kind of perspective.
Yeah, so that was my number 2, where it's kind of all right, just defensive line as a whole would be that number 2 for me. Even if you get a commitment from Tevita Nonu, you can still go out there and add. And I think more likely than not, it would come in the form of this guy is committed to, talking about A&M there. This guy's committed to whatever school you want to say. Insert that here. Oh, he's going up to Washington for a visit, but hasn't announced a decommitment or anything. That's interesting. It's what we saw last year with Jordan Clay and Jalen Battle. It's the exact same thing. Trez Davis, the same thing. Kekua Mua was committed to Florida when he took his official visit up here. Obviously, they were all here on the same weekend. But that's one of the things that I'm just watching as a whole, because it is about, just making those end roads, especially on the defensive line, where I look at Aiden O'Neal, who committed to Notre Dame, and that was a guy that Washington certainly showed a lot of interest in early, and things obviously didn't work out. But that was one of those names where, okay, I'm curious to see what that might look like. There are a couple other guys where it's, are you going to kick the tires here? Are you going to, because one thing that I think why it feels a little bit different than other years too is you look at this freshman class and then you look at the sophomore class as well. And Jedd Fisch will be the first person to tell you that, yeah, you want to bring all this high-end talent in through the door every single year, but you also have to be able to retain it. And if a lot of these young guys do play the significant roles that we expect them to, let's go to Jordan Clay, for example, here, because that was a successful one that you were able to pull off last year. Let's say he does make it into the rotation, and I don't know, let's say he catches 5 touchdown passes this year. You're happy with that, right? It's still going to take a significant amount of NIL to be able to retain him and Cody Green and John Mills and Champ Talialia and Zadrius Rainey Saleh and so on and so on and so on. And I think that's one of those things where I don't say that to say oh, there's a problem with NIL. Oh, you should be worried about this. You should be worried about that. But you hear Jedd Fisch talk about this all the time when it's, that's priority one. It's the guys who have played in the system. It's keeping them here and continuing to get better and grow in our system. And there are so many of those guys that we're going to see this year that are freshmen or redshirt freshmen or sophomores that you can just continue to build this program with. So instead of saying, hey, it might take X amount to get this guy from the high school ranks, we're really comfortable with what this is right now. And we're not going to make that investment to get them through the door. Cause that's another thing we've heard from Jedd specifically is we do overpay some of these guys to make sure they get in the door. And then we figure things out from there.
And the thing that I'm smiling a little bit when I say this is because what the irony of what I'm about to say is Jedd's also said a lot of this is going to have to come from third party NILs, which checks notes goes to the UW. Mountain Lake Futures is there, but not there, and people
it's a weird thing at this time.
And Pat Chung came out and said, hey, we're on brand with our competitors, and it's I'm not sure you're on the same building floor, let alone the same room.
So I will say. Go ahead.
Well, actually, that's the other part of this. Where you're looking at investing this money in talent, but where are you going to get it? Is it wise to do it, knowing you might only get 1 year out of that guy and make that splash for really nothing?
So that's certainly a good point. I will say, as it pertains to the Mountain Lake Futures, I'm just curious to see what happens next because it all feels like a lot of foresight. Where the CSC wins that case against Nebraska the other day as well. And while, there are so many other legal avenues that we really don't have time to dive into on this show, you bring up an interesting point with that, where it's, okay, is this what's going to happen from that? Is that what's going to happen from that? And I think it's worth keeping in mind that Pat Shun is somebody who has been in on a lot of these discussions on a national level. Does that mean, practically shuttering Mountain Lake Futures at this point in time is a good idea? Absolutely not. But is it something that, maybe we look at in 5 years and, oh, this was the reasoning behind that? Again, good or bad, I'm not here to tell you that either way. But I think that might be something to just keep in mind when having that discussion.
No, and I completely agree with that. It's just like when you were talking about surprise visitors, it's in that you flip a G6 guy, like a La Tech guy, like those type of things where it's, hey, we have the ability to coach 4 and 5-star guys, and we, could get some of them, but these flips and these surprises are going to be like a Desmond Roebuck coming from the G6 and Alex McLaughlin, that type of thing where like, why were they not recruiting more? Why did you get him here? Don't really question it. Can we just play and keep it pushing? Like that's really what you're looking for, because overall, like the class is still what, top 10, top 12 at least.
Top 12 right now, yeah.
Again, subjective numbers or whatever, narratives be what they are. But when you look at these still crop coming in, you like what you see. The other 30 seconds on this discussion, how does your quarterback room look at the end of the year? Like, you have 4 right now. Like 2 of those guys transfer out. Do you take
5?
5, right? Sorry, but do 2 of those guys transfer out, and you just kind of sit with Blake, which you probably should do, by the way. But I'm just, like you already have Blake.
Well,
so how do you manage the roster spots, vis-a-vis money, and all that?
So I'm glad you say that before we get out of here, because we should have mentioned that in the last segment, because JP Lossman was down hanging out with Caden Jones last week. Like that's still something that maybe you're doing that in anticipation that like, hey, there is a potential that 2 of these guys transfer out for one reason or another. So you still have to explore that avenue. So that's just another one of those things where I think with Caden specifically, there would be ways to make that work, especially if 2 guys do transfer, but it's still just a worthwhile conversation to have.
Yeah, and that's also, these conversations aren't really kind of come to fruition until mid-November, when we see that, DeMond's played every game, and, Elijah's been the backup, and none of the other 2 guys got in at any point. So at some point, development works as long as you want it to, but guys, and especially quarterbacks, need to play. And and Blake's coming in very good. So like that 3-way, 4-way competition, probably 3-way, let's be honest here. Like next year, as you're looking at it, like, yeah, you like that going into it. Maybe you allocate those other 2 roster spots for a tackle and a D lineman or a corner. Again, these are all things that in May, June, July, different than October, November, closing to signing day in December.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all you everydayers out there for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. If you like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, it's a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.